On July 20th, 1969, the world stood still. Over 500 million people, the largest television audience in history, were glued to their grainy black and white screens, their collective breath held in suspense. They were watching the culmination of a decade of human ambition, a geopolitical struggle played out on a cosmic scale. They were watching humanity's first attempt to land on another world. From the sterile, tense environment of Mission Control in Houston to living rooms across the planet, everyone listened intently to the crackling radio transmissions coming from the lunar module, the Eagle, as it descended towards the surface of the moon. The voices of astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were a picture of calm professionalism, a steady stream of altitudes and velocities that belied the immense danger of their maneuver. The world heard Armstrong's iconic call, "The Eagle has landed." It heard the relief in the voice of Mission Control. And a few hours later, it heard the immortal words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." This was the official story, a flawless narrative of human triumph, broadcast for all to see. But for 50 years, a persistent and deeply disturbing counter-narrative has simmered beneath the surface, a story that claims the public was only shown a carefully censored version of events. It is a story that suggests that during the most critical moments of the mission, something happened, something was seen, and that the true terrifying transcripts of what the Apollo 11 astronauts really saw on the moon have been hidden by NASA for half a century. This incredible story begins not with what was said, but with what was not said. It centers on a now famous and highly controversial 2-minute period of radio silence that occurred almost immediately after the Eagle had landed. According to the official mission logs, this communication blackout was a simple technical issue. NASA's explanation has varied over the years, sometimes attributed to an overheating television camera that needed to be switched off, and other times to the brief period it took for the astronauts to switch between their different antenna systems. To the public, it was a minor, insignificant technical glitch in an otherwise perfect broadcast. But to a small community of amateur ham radio operators and independent researchers around the world, this period of silence was anything but insignificant. They claimed that the official NASA broadcast was on a time delay, a standard procedure to allow them to censor any unexpected problems or profanity. These radio enthusiasts allege that they, with their own powerful equipment, were able to bypass this public feed and listen in on a different, unedited, and much more direct channel. And what they claim to have heard during those 2 minutes of official silence would, if true, rewrite human history. According to these unconfirmed reports, the calm, professional tone of the astronauts vanished the moment they landed. It was replaced by a tone of awe, disbelief, and perhaps even fear. A series of alleged quotes, transcribed by these radio operators, began to circulate in the underground press in the years following the mission. They painted a picture not of a desolate, empty landscape, but of a place that was already occupied. One of the most famous and chilling of these alleged transmissions is attributed to Neil Armstrong himself, his voice supposedly filled with a mixture of excitement and alarm. The alleged quote is, "These babies are huge, sir, enormous. Oh my God, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out there, lined up on the far side of the crater edge. They're on the moon watching us." This single explosive statement is the cornerstone of the hidden transcript theory. It suggests that the first act of the Apollo 11 astronauts upon landing was not to prepare for their historic moonwalk, but to report the presence of massive, unidentified, and presumably non-human objects observing them from a nearby crater. The alleged transmission continued, painting an even more detailed picture. Armstrong, or perhaps Aldrin, was said to have described the objects in more detail, calling them huge and far more technologically advanced than their own lander. The conversation, as transcribed by these third-party listeners, was one of two men trying to make sense of something that was utterly impossible, their military test pilot coolness giving way to the raw human emotion of witnessing a paradigm-shattering event. The story goes that Mission Control, after a stunned silence of its own, gave a coded order to the astronauts to cease unofficial communication, to switch to a secure medical channel, and to proceed with the public-facing mission as planned. At that point, The alleged secret transmission was cut off, and a few moments later, the official broadcast to the world resumed, with the astronauts' calm, professional voices returning, as if nothing had happened. For 50 years, NASA has vehemently and consistently denied the existence of any such transmission. They have dismissed the quotes as a complete fabrication, a hoax born from the public's excitement and desire for a more dramatic story. The astronauts themselves, when asked, have either denied it or given evasive answers. The official transcript for that period remains blank or filled with routine technical checks. There is no official record of any UFO sighting by the Apollo 11 crew on the lunar surface. The case, according to the government, is closed. And yet the story will not die. It has been kept alive by the sheer number of independent radio operators from around the world who claim to have heard the same thing. And it is bolstered by a pattern of other strange events and unexplained observations that pepper the official records of the entire Apollo program. The 2 minutes of silence may be the most famous part of the mystery, but it is far from the only piece of evidence that suggests the astronauts were not alone in the void of space. What if the hidden transcript is not just a single 2-minute conversation, but a whole series of censored observations, a long-suppressed story of what humanity truly found when we first left our cradle? The alleged 2-minute transmission of a UFO sighting upon landing is the most explosive and famous part of the Apollo 11 conspiracy. But for investigators who have spent decades combing through the declassified Apollo archives, it is just one piece of a much larger and more perplexing puzzle. The pattern of strange encounters and unexplained observations did not begin in those 2 minutes of radio silence. It began long before the Eagle ever landed, in the cold black void of space on the 3-day journey to the moon. And it had been happening to other missions as well. When viewed in isolation, each of these incidents has an official, plausible explanation provided by NASA. But when viewed together, they paint a disturbing picture of a space program that was consistently encountering phenomena its own highly trained astronauts could not identify. The first major anomaly for the Apollo 11 crew occurred on their 3rd day in space. As they coasted towards the moon, they noticed something strange outside their window, a bright, flashing object that seemed to be pacing their spacecraft. For a crew of seasoned test pilots, anything that wasn't supposed to be there was a cause for concern. They used a monocular to get a better look, but couldn't identify it. The official mission transcripts document their conversation with Mission Control in Houston. The crew radios down, asking about the location of the SIVB, the final stage of their Saturn V rocket, which had been jettisoned 2 days earlier. They believed the booster was some 6,000 miles away from them, but Mission Control radios back that the SIVB is in fact much closer. The official conclusion was that the crew was looking at one of the 4 detached panels that had once housed the lunar module, a piece of their own debris glinting in the sun. On the surface, it's a simple case of mistaken identity. The astronauts saw something, asked what it was, and Mission Control gave them an answer. Case closed. But the story doesn't end there. In the years following the mission, the astronauts themselves began to cast doubt on the official explanation. Buzz Aldrin, in numerous interviews, has spoken openly about this incident. He has stated that the crew was absolutely certain the object was not one of their detached panels. He described it as an L-shaped object and felt that its flight path was not consistent with a simple piece of debris. While he is always careful not to claim it was an extraterrestrial craft, he has unequivocally stated that it was a genuine, unidentified flying object. He said in one interview, "There was something out there that was close enough to be observed. And what was it?" Now the 3 of us were not going to blurt out, "Hey Houston, we've got something moving alongside of us and we don't know what it is." We weren't about to do that, because we knew that those transmissions would be heard by all sorts of people, and who knows what somebody would have demanded we do. This admission is a bombshell. It confirms the crew saw something they couldn't explain, and that they deliberately chose not to report it fully over the open radio channel, fearing public panic and the potential cancellation of their landing. This pattern of strange sensory experiences in the lunar environment is not unique to Apollo 11. Just 2 months earlier, in May of 1969, the crew of Apollo 10, Tom Stafford, John Young, and Eugene Cernan, were performing the final full-dress rehearsal for the moon landing. As their lunar module, nicknamed Snoopy, flew over the far side of the moon, they were completely alone, cut off from all radio contact with Earth. It was in this profound radio silence that they began to hear something impossible through their headsets. It was a strange, ethereal whistling sound, an outer spacey music, as they would later describe it. The declassified audio transcripts from this period are bone-chilling. You can hear the genuine shock and disbelief in the astronauts' voices. Cernan asks, "You hear that? That whistling sound? Whoo?" Young replies, "That sure is weird music." They debate whether they should report it to Houston, fearing that the NASA flight surgeons would think they were hallucinating and ground them. "Should we tell them about it?" one asks. "I don't know," another replies. "We ought to think about it." For decades, these transcripts remained classified. When they were finally released in 2008, NASA provided an official explanation. The sounds, they claimed, were simply caused by radio interference between the VHF radios of the lunar module and the command module, which were orbiting in close proximity. But the astronauts themselves have remained unconvinced. Eugene Cernan, the last man to walk on the moon, stated in his later years that he had been in space a lot, and he knew what radio interference sounded like. The music they heard on the far side of the moon, he said, was something different. It was another data point, another official explanation that didn't quite satisfy the men who were actually there. The Apollo archives are filled with these oddities, coded language that has fueled speculation for years. During the historic Apollo 8 mission, the first to orbit the moon, astronaut Jim Lovell famously radioed, "Be advised, there is a Santa Claus." This was later confirmed to be a playful, pre-arranged code to confirm that they had visual contact with their jettisoned booster rocket. But to researchers, it was another example of the astronauts using coded language to report something they couldn't or wouldn't discuss over an open channel. When viewed in isolation, each of these events, the 2 minutes of silence, the Apollo 11 bogey, the Apollo 10 music, has an official, plausible and mundane explanation. But when viewed together, they begin to form a disturbing pattern. It is a pattern of the world's most highly trained pilots and observers, consistently encountering audio and visual phenomena in the lunar environment that they could not immediately identify or explain. It suggests that the journey to and from the moon was not the sterile, empty voyage that was presented to the public. The question was no longer just what the astronauts saw when they landed. The question was now, what was already waiting for them when they arrived? The evidence, some claim, was not just in the audio transcripts, but hidden in plain sight, in the thousands of photographs they took of the lunar surface itself. The strange audio recordings and ambiguous astronaut testimonies from the Apollo program provided a tantalizing, yet ultimately inconclusive, trail of evidence. A strange sound could be dismissed as radio interference. A fleeting visual could be explained away as a piece of debris. But the astronauts returned to Earth with something far more concrete, a silent, objective record of what they had witnessed, thousands upon thousands of high-resolution photographs and hours of pristine film footage. For over 50 years, this vast, publicly accessible archive has been the primary battleground for researchers who believe that NASA is hiding the truth about what humanity really found on the moon. They argue that the proof of a non-human presence is not hidden away in a classified vault, but has been hidden in plain sight all along, encoded in the strange anomalies and inexplicable details of NASA's own photographs. The foundation of this theory rests on a deeply disturbing accusation that NASA, from the very beginning of the Apollo program, had a secret policy to alter its photographic evidence before releasing it to the public. This claim is not just wild speculation, it is based on the testimony of several alleged former NASA employees who came forward decades after the missions. One of the most prominent of these whistleblowers was a woman named Donna Hare, who worked as an illustrator and photographic slide technician for a NASA contractor during the Apollo era. Hare claimed that she had access to a high-security photo lab and that she was told by multiple colleagues that their job was to airbrush anomalies out of the lunar photographs before they were printed for public release. When she asked what they were airbrushing, a colleague reportedly told her with a chilling straightforwardness, "Flying saucers." Another key witness was Sergeant Carl Wolf, a US Air Force technician who in 1965 was sent on assignment to a NSA facility at Langley Air Force Base. He claimed that while there, he was shown into a darkroom by another airman who showed him a set of images that had just been received from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. Wolf alleges that these images, taken of the far side of the moon, clearly depicted massive artificial structures, geometric bases, towering spires, and dome-like buildings, all clearly not the result of natural geological processes. He was told that his job was to help process this imagery and to never speak of what he had seen. These testimonies, if true, paint a picture of a systematic, institutional-level cover-up. They suggest that the publicly available photo archive is a sanitized version of the truth, scrubbed clean of any definitive proof of an extraterrestrial presence. But according to researchers, NASA's sensors were not perfect. They claim that in the thousands of images that were released, many anomalies slipped through the cracks. For decades, independent analysts have been meticulously scanning the Apollo archive, and they have identified a number of now famous photographs that seem to defy conventional explanation. One of the most compelling is a photo taken during the Apollo 17 mission, designated AS-17-135-2680. In the image against the black sky above the lunar horizon, a tall, spire-like object is clearly visible. Dubbed the Shard or the Tower by researchers, it appears to be a massive geometric structure rising from the lunar surface. NASA's official explanation is that it is simply an artifact of the photograph itself, a vertical streak caused by overexposure, a stray piece of debris on the film, or a lens flare. But to those who have analyzed the image, its sharp angles and distinct shape look anything but natural. Another famous anomalous image taken from orbit has been nicknamed the Castle. It appears to show a massive, complex structure, featuring geometric right angles and a distinct castle-like silhouette, seemingly hovering in the darkness above the lunar surface. Researchers like Richard Hoagland have argued that it is a colossal, partially ruined artificial structure, perhaps miles in length, and that NASA's attempts to dismiss it as a piece of the lunar module or a simple photographic artifact are deliberate disinformation. The archive is filled with these visual puzzles. There are photos that show inexplicable parallel tracks in the lunar dust, sometimes going up the sides of craters, in areas where the lunar rover had never been. NASA explains them as the result of rolling boulders or minor seismic events, but researchers argue the tracks are too uniform, too precise to be natural. There are images that show strange, inexplicable lights, like a mysterious blue glow emanating from inside the Aristarchus crater, a phenomenon that has no easy scientific explanation. Of course, for every anomalous photograph, there is a rational, scientific counter-argument. Skeptics correctly point out that the human brain is hardwired to see patterns and familiar shapes in random data, a phenomenon known as pareidolia. It's the same reason we see faces in clouds or a man in the moon. They also argue that the strange artifacts in the photos can be explained by the limitations of 1960s camera technology: lens flare, light leaks over exposure radiation, fogging on the film during its journey through space, and even dust on the scanner plates during digitization decades later. NASA maintains that there is not a single photograph in its entire archive that provides any credible evidence of artificial structures or non-human activity on the moon. They insist that the smoking guns are nothing more than wishful thinking, a desire to see something extraordinary in the mundane. But the alternative theory synthesizes all of these pieces of evidence, the whistleblower testimonies, the photographic anomalies, and the strange audio encounters, into a single, grand narrative. According to this theory, the real mission of the Apollo program was not just to plant a flag and collect rocks. The secret, primary mission, known only to the highest levels of government, was to photograph and investigate these anomalous structures up close. The astronauts in this version of events were not just explorers. They were highly trained reconnaissance agents, sent to gather intelligence on a non-human presence that the government had been aware of for some time. This would explain the astronauts' coded language, their reluctance to speak openly, and the alleged airbrushing of the photos. The public mission was merely a cover for a far more important, and far more secret, objective. If true, it raises an even bigger question. If NASA and the US government did indeed find definitive proof of a non-human presence on the moon, why would they go to such extraordinary lengths to hide it from the world? The answer may lie in a chilling report commissioned by NASA years before the first moon landing, a report that predicted the discovery of extraterrestrial life could lead to the complete and utter collapse of human civilization. The mountain of evidence, while circumstantial, is undeniably vast. The alleged secret transmissions during the 2-minute blackout, the documented bogey that paced Apollo 11 on its journey, the strange outer spacey music heard by the crew of Apollo 10, the consistent testimony from whistleblowers about a policy of airbrushing anomalies from official photographs, and the thousands of publicly available images that contain inexplicable structures and lights. Together, they form a compelling narrative that suggests the official story of the Apollo missions is, at best, incomplete. But it all leads to one overwhelming question. If NASA did find definitive proof of a non-human presence on the moon, be it active observers or ancient, derelict ruins, why would they go to such extraordinary lengths to hide it from the world? Why would they classify the greatest discovery in human history? The answer, it seems, is that the government had already considered this exact scenario and had concluded that revealing the truth could lead to the complete and utter collapse of human civilization. The motive for this half-century of secrecy may be found in a real and deeply chilling document known as the Brookings Report. In 1960, a year before President Kennedy had even announced the goal of landing a man on the moon, NASA commissioned the prestigious Brookings Institution to produce a study on the potential long-term implications of the space program. The report, officially titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs, was a wide-ranging analysis of the potential social, political, and economic effects of space exploration. But buried deep within its pages was a section that addressed the most profound possibility of all: the discovery of intelligent extraterrestrial life. The report's conclusions were not optimistic. They were dire. It warned that if humanity were to discover artifacts or even living beings that were demonstrably more advanced than ourselves, the result could have disintegrating effects on our society. The Brookings Report argued that the very foundations of human civilization could be shaken. Religious institutions, many of which are centered on a human-centric worldview, would be thrown into a crisis of faith from which they might never recover. The scientific community itself, our bastion of knowledge, would be humbled, its entire understanding of the universe rendered obsolete overnight. Social and political structures could destabilize as humanity grappled with a newfound sense of cosmic inferiority. The report specifically noted that societies throughout history that had not been dominant in their own world were the most likely to collapse when confronted with a superior culture. It was a cold academic analysis that reached a terrifying conclusion. Humanity was not psychologically prepared to be anything other than the masters of its own universe. The report even went so far as to suggest that historical documents, if they were found to contain evidence of past alien contact, might need to be withheld from the public to prevent this societal disintegration. For many researchers, this document is the smoking gun. It is the foundational text that established a potential policy of absolute secrecy, a paternalistic and deeply cynical directive that the truth must be hidden, not to prevent panic, but to preserve the fragile structures of our civilization. This policy, they argue, is the reason for the 50-year wait. The astronauts of the Apollo era were not just explorers. They were military officers and government employees, bound by oaths of national security and a profound sense of duty. If they had been ordered to remain silent about what they saw, they would have obeyed. The alleged cover-up, the radio delays, the coded language, the airbrushed photos, was not a conspiracy of rogue individuals, but the execution of a pre-planned official policy born from the dire warnings of the Brookings Report. The secret was kept throughout the Cold War and beyond. The original astronauts grew old, some taking their secrets to the grave, others speaking in careful, cryptic language about their beliefs, but never revealing the full story. The hidden transcripts and the anomalous photos remained the domain of fringe researchers and conspiracy theorists, easily dismissed by the mainstream. But now, the world is changing. In the last several years, the wall of official secrecy surrounding the topic of UFOs, or UAPs as they are now called, has begun to crumble. The United States government, the very institution that has spent decades denying and ridiculing the subject, has made a stunning and historic reversal. The Pentagon has officially declassified and released videos captured by its own Navy fighter pilots, showing objects that perform physics-defying maneuvers. A dedicated government office, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, has been established to investigate these sightings. And in 2023, the world watched as a high-ranking intelligence official, David Grush, testified under oath before the United States Congress, claiming that the US government is in possession of non-human spacecraft and has been running a secret illegal reverse engineering program for decades. This modern disclosure, this slow, steady drip of official admission, forces us to re-examine the past. If the government is now admitting that there are things in our skies they cannot explain, does that not lend new credibility to the decades-old claims about what the Apollo astronauts saw in space and on the moon? Are we, as a society, finally being slowly prepared for a truth that the Brookings report warned we weren't ready for half a century ago? The official story of Apollo 11 remains a powerful and inspiring tale of human achievement, but the declassified files, the leaked testimonies and the photographic evidence, when pieced together, tell a different story. It is a story of a profound and paradigm-shattering discovery, followed by a silent 50-year cover-up, a secret held by a handful of powerful men in the name of preserving our reality. The hidden transcripts may not be a single physical document locked in a vault. They are the entire collection of evidence, the whispers, the strange photos, and the coded words that, when taken together, point to one incredible conclusion. As our own government begins to hint at the reality of a non-human presence, we are forced to look back at that grainy footage from 1969 and ask ourselves a final critical question. When Neil Armstrong took that one giant leap for mankind, was mankind truly alone?